has become sort of a meme with people who know me that I refuse to read anything by George R. R. Martin. I don't have a grudge against him or anything. There are a handful of views and approaches he has that I disagree with, but these are nothing that would keep me from reading any other author's work. And in fact, I think it's quite healthy to read from authors of different viewpoints. My major gripe, and the complaint I'm sure I share with many A Song of Ice and Fire fans, is that he has yet to finish his series. It is a sad fact of the entertainment business that there is no financial incentive to give a story a proper end. Series, books and television alike, are often built by their compelling introductions. You will need to tie up loose ends here and there, but completing a story arc doesn't convince people to watch or buy the next installments. It often has the opposite effect. Once the scary threat is stopped, the audience tunes out. The best stories, from a business perspective, are those that can dangle a carrot in front of audiences for season after season, book after book, offering a taste of conclusion only so far as to keep the audience hungry. Plot climaxes can be rewarding, but it is the cliffhanger that keeps people engaged. Because of this, whole fandoms are built and marketed to, even when stories don't have an end in sight. Case in point, the Game of Thrones shows. By all accounts, the show was great. If Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings adaptations didn't make fantasy mainstream, HBO's Game of Thrones did. But as many of the show's fans know, the ending sucked. Bad. The promise that the previous seasons made went, for the most part, unfulfilled. It is for this reason that I, as well as many other people I've spoken to, don't want to start watching the show now. As far as what I've heard from fans of Gurm's books, there are simply too many plot threads to tie up. Martin is great at world building, as well as crafting complex characters. But he does this almost like a kid in a candy store. He picks out as many things as he wants, with no concern for the tummy ache it'll be later when he has to tie up all the plot threads. This tummy ache is, from what I can tell, the reason he has been working on Winds of Winter for over a decade. But why is this a problem? My argument really comes from a moral perspective, not a monetary one. Sure, you can become a household name with the bulk of a grand narrative, but the final act is what, in my view, makes a writer worth their salt. Each setup promises a payoff. If you don't give your audience a conclusion to the story, you've broken this promise. The meaning of a story is also critically tied to its end. It's when the questions are answered. It's when all the tragedy and hardship of the story is given purpose. There are far too many purposeless stories nowadays. In school, I was in a fiction writing class, the same one where I wrote the earliest version of The Price of a Head. That was received well. There was another student who wrote a short narrative about an old man, recently retired, who was sadly shot and killed in a random gas station robbery. It was a tragedy that fell by no fault of his own. Instead of giving this event meaning, the author abruptly ended the story with his death. The concluding paragraphs explicitly highlighted that the man's entire life led up to this point, and because of sheer bad luck, his life was meaningless. I pray for the student who wrote that. I can't imagine the dark headspace of someone who uses their creative outlet to express unapologetic nihilism. Meaningless stories are a cop-out. The difficulty of writing a story isn't putting words together. This was the case even before tools like ChatGPT. The real difficulty is structuring a narrative by choosing which details to include in order to evoke meaning. Granted, the student did have a meaning in mind, the absence of meaning. This, however, is also a cop-out for a writer. By taking tragedies and removing any redemptive silver linings, one can only assume a universe devoid of any real point. This is why it's a storyteller's responsibility to have a great ending. They provide meaning to the overall narrative. The first acts of a work promise a final revelation. While fan bases can be built around setups, the conclusion determines how the story will be remembered. This script I'm reading right now was originally something I just sent out to my author newsletter. I decided to turn it into a video because, in addition to being received really well, the message means a lot to me personally. People are dying for good stories. And like the student I mentioned earlier, There are way too many people that just don't see the meaning in things. A wise man and good friend of mine once said that every major conqueror in history was LARPing as a previous conqueror, and the first conquerors were just LARPing as mythological heroes. Caesar thought of himself as Alexander the Great, who in turn was pretending to be Hercules. It doesn't matter who you are, emulating heroes is human nature. And when the heroes you emulate are those in pointless stories, well, you'll end up living a pointless life. You won't go out and slay the dragons. So when you're watching or reading something and find yourself saying, "Literally me," when there's a cool hero, embrace that. Like and subscribe and all that jazz. Seeing numbers gets bigger gives me a huge morale boost. Also, links to my books and some free stuff should be in the description below. That's all I really got for today. Class dismissed.
Away with you, vile beggar!